What's up, everybody? I was listening to a video about Pytheas, an ancient Greek merchant, sailor, explorer dude, not to be confused with Pythias, Aristotle's wife, like as if, who would ever make that mistake? But he described what he saw when he reached Britain, and it kind of made me stop what I was doing because what he was describing sounds exactly like what we see today in Malta and a few other places around the world. But you probably heard of this. They just call it Ruts, Malta. But they call it that euphemistically because, according to the experts, there's no way this could have actually been formed by carts. Why not? Because it's cut into limestone. And if this were cut into there while this is still soft, then it'd have to be 100 bazillion years old, right? And only a simple-minded folk would think such a thing was possible. So I found a video of an expert visiting for the first time. I'm not exactly sure what field he was an expert in, but his take on this after spending a week or so in the area is that it seems that this effect would be to divert water around and stop it flowing over the bank there and channel it. And here's a good example of a pond. So his expert opinion is that they chiseled these channels into limestone to divert water into these little ponds for storage. But let's zoom out a little bit here so you can see the scale of this. So you're telling me that people chiseled all of this out just to store water in these little ponds out here? You're really going to go with that even after seeing things like this where it's obvious that in one pass through there, the wheel was to the left of the rut, and then another pass through there, probably by somebody else, the wheel was to the right of the rut? You'll have to forgive me if I disagree. It's kind of impressive just how controversial this subject is in academia. This is from a paper, The Morphological Variability of Maltese Cart Ruts and Its Implications. Diverse views have been expressed on how and when the cart ruts formed, with implications for elucidating the archaeological and geomorphology of the Maltese islands. While there have been occasional suggestions that some ruts may be natural geological features, Dawkins, 1918, the overwhelming view has been that cart ruts are the result of anthropogenic activity. The estimated age range for the ruts has included Neolithic, Bronze Age, Punic Phoenician to Roman, medieval, and early modern. So tell me you don't know without telling me you don't know. In general, the ruts have been seen as being created by vehicles, be it wheeled carts or other forms such as slide cars. Less common views include those suggested by Sagona, who argued that the ruts were not produced by vehicles at all, but were deliberately made as field furrows and sometimes as water channels. Finally, Arnaez in 2018 suggested some ruts may have had an astronomical religious purpose and were deliberately aligned as a calendar to mark things like the solstices. So look, 9 times out of 10, when I hear people getting into this astroarchaeology, they're just trying to sell their book to people who don't actually think about what the person is saying. You're telling me that they cut thousands of grooves out here to track the winter solstice? Okay, here's me and Ruckus setting up our astro calendar in the yard yesterday. This is marking the position of Orion at about 9:13 p.m. And then here we got Alpha Centauri, and don't forget Sirius. We got to get the dog star over here. I mean, Sirius, Ruckus is more accurate than this. There are a few sites around the world that I can agree, all right, that's probably a astrological calendar or something that they've got going, like Adam's calendar. But unless you've got a spot that is very clearly where you're supposed to be viewing from, like if you stand right here and the sun sets directly over these rocks at the summer solstice and then directly over this one at the winter solstice, I'm not buying it. And I've just seen this grift way too many times trying to make themselves sound smart and important. And seriously, who's going to use curved lines to mark the location of something? That dude had to have got laughed out of his department. I don't know. With today's education, he probably got an award. Now, a lot of these even have a fixed gauge or width between the two of them, which I don't know. That might be an important clue. So let's just Occam's razor this thing. Tell me what you see here. Go ask a 5-year-old, what is this? What do you see here? They're going to say tire tracks. I mean, if you've ever been mountain biking or dirt biking or even just driven a muddy dirt road, then you know how this goes. Everybody's trying to get through here. One rut gets wore down a little bit too much. So then the next guy passes a little bit to the left, next guy a little bit to the right. And that's exactly what you see here. Yeah, the rut is 8 to 10 inches wide, but the wheels that are actually going through there are only 2 inches. So you see people trying to get through there with the shallowest bit, especially if they're connected by an axle, which is evidenced by the fixed gauge. Then you've only got so much clearance with whatever you're driving, pushing through there. So now back to the Voyage of Pytheas, and since they already did the AI art on it, I'm going to borrow it. Pytheas found Britain by following the smell of smoke and the distant hum of life over the waves. His ship ran aground on the rocky shores of Cornwall, where cliffs loomed over the water like ancient sentries. That's sentries with an S, not a C. The crew scrambled ashore, pulling ropes and cargo after them. On these jagged coasts, locals chipped away at the earth, hauling out tin, as in the metal tin. Pytheas, watching from a distance, at first saw them loading wagons at low tide, crossing to an island they called Ictus, a strange place that rose out of the sea only when the water pulled away. That's worded kind of funny, but at low tide, then it was connected to the land, and then high tide, it would become an island. He tracked the tide closely, waiting for his chance to follow. When the tide ebbed, Pytheas and his crew trudged across the slick, wet sands with the locals as the heavy wheels of oxen carts left deep cuts behind them, and the island set in the ghostly mist. So I know we're talking about the British Isles here, but the same basic methodology was probably used throughout the ancient world. You don't need the help of AI art to picture in your head exactly what he's describing there. There's no tin to be found on Malta, unless they cleaned it all out by the time of the Minoans. But I'd say that there's some resource that they were gathering or mining out of this area. If they were just passing through to a certain destination, then they'd kind of be all parallel. And these are just kind of going every which direction. So they're not trying to get to one particular spot. In places like this, it looks like they're searching around and scrounging for whatever resource they're after here, which, you know, it could just be mussels and shrimp, crayfish that are easy to get to during low tide. Then in other areas, you see kind of the main roads in and out. In general, it's easier to follow in somebody else's tracks than to cut new trail, especially in wet, soggy stuff. But then once you get to a soft spot, the rut starts getting too deep to clear, so you got to kind of start taking alternative avenues here. So just look at the general lay of the land here, and then look at a marshy area on a large scale, and then zooming in on a smaller scale, look at some tide pools. And you see how all of the high spots are kind of random, rounded shapes. And to me, it looks a lot like what we see here. The grassy areas are highlighting the deeper spots. Those were probably all just puddles when they were walking through here, and the rest is exposed mud. Looking at this from the top down, you see a main thoroughfare going through right here, and then a searching pattern going out through this area. But why are there no tracks right here and right here? Because it was too deep right there. And you see basically on the left half how you've got all of those green circle or oval shaped patterns. This is kind of an extreme version of that, but once again, tide pools. So to me, I would 100% say that this is some type of floodplain or marsh area, and that those are 100% some type of vehicle tracks. Don't let your lying eyes fool you. But the problem is, and the reason they don't go with the simplest answer, is because look off in the background there, and you see the ocean? These are about a mile inland and up 800 to 1,000 foot, something like that. You got a 100-foot cliff just at the shoreline, and it's all uphill from there. So by academic thinking, if this was at sea level, then it had to have been 11 bazillion years ago. And people hadn't even grown arms and legs by that point. They were just flopping around in the puddles here. So there's no way you can have tire tracks from that far back in time. Luckily, I don't always subscribe to academic thinking, so I think it was possible that this could have uplifted much more recent than that. Let's look at Lake Titicaca, and it's been speculated that it was at sea level, at least within the Holocene period. They still say it has a small salt content and now sits at an elevation of over 12,000 feet. Now, that drastic of an uplift, it was probably at sea level back when Saturn was our sun, but it's been moving much more recently. Here you're looking at Lake Titicaca leveled, where it sits today, but there's an older shoreline that is 270 feet higher on our left side than the right side, and it extends that plane out to our right. So that had to be sitting at level at one point because that's the only way water sits. And this is the other side of the world. I just wanted to show that it does happen. The Mediterranean is crazy. I can show you some cities halfway in the water, some all the way in the water, and then an ancient seaport that's 7 miles away from the sea now. And this is a very active area. This is Mount Etna. This is Vesuvius, and then the red pin is the Phlegery caldera. This is right where Pompeii's covered in ash, and the ancient Roman city of Baiae is underwater. This is all kind of in a straight line. But at the caldera, we have the world's only case, I believe, of Bradyseism. It just happens to be a UNESCO site. Bradyseism is the evidence in historical times, by that they mean since writing has been around the last couple thousand years, of a long-lasting phenomenon of generalized subsidence and localized uplift of the area of Camp Phlegery. This area is included in a large volcano, the Camp Phlegery caldera, which is a nested structure resulting from 2 major episodes of ancient caldera collapse. The occurrence of the Roman coastline at about 10 meters below sea level and of numerous Roman and medieval remains below sea level is a further evidence that the caldera has generally subsided in the last 2,000 years. So check this out. Down here at the bottom is the Roman sea level, and then the next one up is medieval, and then present day is right here, but during one of these Brady seismic events, it's, magma swelling up underneath, apparently. It has risen up to here and here, even higher than present day. Now, they treat this as a localized Brady seismic event, but that is the sea level. That means the whole sea is at that level. Or I guess it could be the reverse of that, and this particular piece of shoreline has risen and fallen, but that's going to affect the whole Mediterranean as well. This is just since Roman times, and from the highest point to the lowest point, you've got almost 20 meters of change, 60 feet. So that'd make a big difference on the coastline, and it might explain Manuthus and Heraklion off the coast of Egypt. I was thinking about doing a video soon about them anyway. Looking back at Ruts here, you still got the same tide pool water puddles here, but that's going up at a pretty good angle. Hills usually don't show up they don't look near as steep on camera as they are in person. That comes from a lot of filming in the mountains, and on camera, it's not near as impressive and death-defying as it actually is in person. So that's a pretty steep hill, I'm thinking. But my guess is this was all one flat floodplain at one time, and it has uplifted. Now, I would still guess this was a long time ago, way before Roman, before Minoan, possibly the last world age, like before Noah's flood. Who knows what they had going on back then. But I see this being at sea level. After all, this is coralline limestone, first part of that being coral. And, I've heard some interesting ideas on here about how this is the petrified bones of giants, but limestone is full of seashells. So unless that giant is injecting seafood, then I don't think that's it. And the only difference between limestone and marble is marble doesn't have any fossils in it, which makes the Carrara marble quarry there in Italy just mind-blowing to me. It's this entire mountaintop full of beautiful, clean marble. So what was presumably one of the deeper parts of the sea at one point is now the mountaintop, according to the prevailing theory on how limestone is formed. They say that it's formed from the calcium carbonate from decomposing sea creatures that become compacted and cemented together. Now, I don't have a better explanation, but to me, that's just lacking something. I mean, how many shrimp shells do you have to stack up to form this? Geology is pretty mind-bending when you get into it, and I know that there's seashells contained in that rock, but it still seems like something's missing from this equation. Here you can see that it forms in the deeper troughs off the shoreline, And I don't know, maybe figure in a huge tsunami where everything, all this organic matter gets mixed in with the dirt and settles in this trough and is cemented together. But I don't recall ever seeing any fossilized mammals in limestone. But the biggest problem I have with all this is you can't show me an example of hundreds of feet of limestone being formed right now. They only give one example, saying it's currently being formed in the Bahamas platform. And if that's the case, then it seems like you should be able to show a core sample or something of 100 feet of nothing but organic matter here. And I've seen nothing of the kind. Since it does hold a bunch of marine fossils, though, I guess I can agree that it's formed in shallow marine environments. And even though I still have questions, this does back up the idea that this was under shallow water, but it's now sitting at hundreds of feet above sea level. There's also tracks down at the shoreline leading right off out into deep water, so I would say that this was all sitting at a different level, which is what you'd expect to find if the middle of the island did uplift, because this is going downhill into the water. So if the ancient coastline is fairly level down here at the bottom, then it starts lifting up here in the middle and it's kind of tilting downhill, and then it's really lifted up on the top. Then the area that used to be level is going to be pointing downhill. Now, I've heard YouTubers go the exact opposite route of academia and say that these must have been super advanced vehicles with stabilization and leveling. Otherwise, one rut would be a lot deeper than the other one. And these were vehicles that were driven like our modern cars, and indicating these were like 8 to 10 inch tires like on a car. But when I see things like this, what I see is just a narrow 1.5 to 2 inch wheel. It's just that there's been many, many passes through these deeper spots. But when you're looking at this, you can see what one pass through there does. So those deep, wide ruts were from, a main thoroughfare. Everybody was using that track to get out there and then spread out and scavenge around. So I wouldn't go as far as to say that people were out mudding in their Chevy truck. I'd say these were probably just wooden wagon wheels, because I've never seen any convincing evidence that any previous culture has been more advanced than we are today, at least not in our current world age. But there's really no telling how many yuga cycles we've been through and how advanced people actually got back in those days. And then everything was wiped out in a world age ending catastrophe, and all their toys are buried under 100 feet of muck. But even with that, you don't find a bulldozer sticking out of the Grand Canyon where water's carved out 1,000 feet of plateau. Anyway, that's my take on the Malta cart ruts. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.